Why? But that's against the truth. That's why I go around with that. I'm after it. I don't go against the truth. I got out of school. When I got out of school, I was trying to be a working man. And I made a woman that wasn't right. And I learned that her parents are in the military and the police. And I can't see my son. And all I gotta do is be outside and work. So I met up to the first police officer. I just kind of, at that point, I blanked up because I was tired of not getting help. I apologized to the officer I killed, to his family, the judge, the society, everybody in this country. Whenever y'all give me a death penalty, man, whatever y'all do to me, I know you have to prove a point to everybody else that this is not the way to do things, to prove things. But I just want to let everybody know that I tried to do everything I could before I said that. Please.
Explain that to me, because I think other people will appreciate hearing what you're talking about when you say you did everything you could do.
I tried to be a team player and go to work.
So you mean over this long period of time going through life?
Over the last 11 years, I've been through hell. So I wanted to make the closing space and feel the burning I felt in my heart. So I wish I could show you a personal space I want to make right now, but it's not going to help.
Well, how I feel, and I know what I can't stand no, but I'm pretty sure I have a good idea.
I know, and that's why I know that whoever I shoot or whoever I shot, it will hurt this society to realize that it is people that talk to do. And that was the wrong thing to do. Because I went from a hard-working man to a murderer. I don't know nothing. I'm ready to receive whatever y'all want to do to me because I give up, man. I don't have nothing to do for myself.
I certainly understand those feelings.
I mean, you understand, sir? I work for a society. I have to do everybody's job, and I still can't see my son. I go down to the police station. I go to the judges to see my son. The mistake I made Sunday morning was the worst thing I ever thought of doing because that's an event I cannot take back. One thing I can ask, can y'all give me a natural life sentence, man? I know that I'm coming jail for this. I can apologize a million times, but I cannot take back that one moment where I could change the events of these little girls' life one moment. But whatever this asset, this lion, this monkey, whatever it was, it did not, it came out to a point where, okay, that's what I know I'm going to see how I went from when I was young, I thought it was a name I was telling everybody else. And then people always say gorillas because we black. But I really see myself as a lower asset. If a higher intelligence don't know how to contain it, it's going to burn through whatever it is. The only reason why I know that I'm just a lower asset is because I had an event in the world yesterday that was not in my character.
So is that the first time anything like that's ever happened?
Sir, I never heard nobody in my life, sir. I thought the only way of paying back this world before I leave is hurt somebody.
Well, I appreciate your honesty. I think other people will appreciate it. Even though I know you feel like there may have been some kind of justification or something that made it maybe not okay, but maybe felt somewhat justified?
No, sir. There was no justice in what I did. There was no thinking in what I did.
So do you believe it was wrong?
So, I don't know what I didn't really do.
You would?
I feel like I don't need it, but I know that's what y'all gonna do to me. Like, I already had that in my mind because of our hands to come. And I don't know what to tell you, sir, because as you notice, my whole life was every corner to where I could ask out to somebody. And that wasn't the right thing to do, sir. You're right. At one point in the morning, I did not think of y'all. I did not think the thought of me beating somebody up or shooting somebody. The only thing is shoot my stomach down. But knowing that I knew from the moment that I put that trigger that wasn't the right thing to do. My dog, I hope this. My dog will do it, look in your eyes, hope to see that innocent person make the wrong move. If you look, if you just Google my name, I've always been a good athlete, I've always been a good student, I've always been a person taught to rationalize everything.
You said that you mentioned student. Did you, where'd you go to high school?
I went to Fox Tech High School.
Fox Tech? And did you graduate? Oh, you said you graduated and got your GED.
Yeah, I remember graduation. Yeah, I went to college, so with the Falcon College, I went to St. John College. So,
you attended college?
yeah. So, at the age of 31, my intellectual thinking wants to be in the classroom. I want to learn how to be a rocket scientist. I want to learn how to have my own business. I always have the same one. I always got to a point where I want to do something wrong like the worst thing I thought I could have done to my family or the society was hit myself off. I know that wasn't the right move. But man, work for this police station, man. My daddy's a military, man. They tell me don't come to my house without a team, like there's the army and the police is on their team. When I think about this situation, there's no stopping me from this going up on. But my emotions got overran and I took it out on the first person I seen. And sir, man, I want to cry and apologize to this person and their family. But something in my heart just won't let me, man. I don't care about nothing, man, because I don't have nothing to live for. The only thing I want to do is hurt somebody because I know my life ain't nothing, sir.
Do you still feel that way?
Absolutely.
Do you still want to hurt people?
No, sir. The fact that I did that makes my life over, and I understand that. And the fact that I did, it makes me regret it, sir. I regret this, sir.
Well, your life's going to be different.
One thing I can pray for, but y'all don't give me a good time.
So let me ask you that. That's an interesting statement that you just made, because earlier you said you don't have anything to live for, and you talked kind of like you didn't want to live. But at the same time, you're saying that you don't want to die.
No. I want to hurt you.
For what it's worth, I appreciate your honesty. I think it will give some, it will answer some questions to get his family.
Some people live. I think what I believe in. I'm sorry that he was a victim because I was not thinking, man, I cannot. The fact that I'm crying makes me mad because I know I'm crying and I don't. The thinking in me is like, man, you screwed, you fucked up, man. And you took some money away from that family. But it's like, man, who gonna help me? Nobody doesn't have no help. But I understand that if I just go home and go to sleep, that I could find a better way, man. And 31 years of my life made me go to that police officer and do that. I didn't want to be cold-blooded. I didn't want to be some heartless killer because I'm not. If you check my record, I ain't ever been in jail for nothing, for dope charges, family violence, no gun charges, no killing, no nothing. And that's not the criminal record to go out for either, but early in my life, I mean, I try to be sneaky fingers and make extra money. When that police called me for hitting my son-in-law because she already tried to kill me. She already tried to kill me. She hit my little button out of the bag. I had several times to black her out. But individual thinking, man, feel like, okay, maybe she can change.
Maybe let me go get a paper and I'll come back. I have a couple of questions I want to ask you. And I will be about done. Do you have any questions for me? I don't know if you'll answer for you. I do appreciate that.
Yes, I do. I just want to ask the judge for mercy and this case scenario, even though it might not be fit or deserved.
I think you'll have an opportunity to do that. I feel very confident.
I want to apologize to the police station and to all you guys. All y'all did is protect me. And for a brief moment, I didn't understand that that's what y'all meant for. I felt like in one moment, okay, I have to lash out at somebody because I didn't try everything. And then when I looked at the situation, I see that I obviously didn't think hard enough. So I hope you tell the judge that I want you to tell the judge and my family that I understand me, I'm not a hardest person. And I made a mistake because I was hurt. Honestly, so honestly.
I appreciate your honesty, okay? I'm gonna go get something. I'll be right back. Can I bring you anything?
I'm good.
Be right back. Did you have socks on?
Yeah. I'm glad you took them off. I'm not sure. I'm just wasting my water.
You feel cold?
Yeah.
We're just about done. Let me ask you something real quick. And you've been super duper honest with me. What, after everything's all said and done, what did you do with the gun? You know, the weapon is what really sometimes is a hang up for people. But if you really expect people to believe you when you say you feel bad, you can't hold back.
So you trying to find the weapon?
I'm asking you what happened to it, yeah. Yeah, I'd like to know what you did with
That's going to help my chances to the point of what, like,
it. What's it going to do? It's going to show that you were remorseful, that you want to make sure if that gun doesn't get in anybody else's hands that shouldn't have it. It's going to show that you did everything that you could to correct the wrong.
Alright, so the only reason why I say it because I ain't doing it in the trash.
The trash, where?
On the north side, by the trash can, like the,
Like a dumpster?
yeah, I heard whatever on the north side, and I just threw it in a random trash. I knew it the city was gonna pick it up randomly.
Which Valero?
The one, I don't remember the name of the Valero. I just know, it was by, what is it? On West Avenue, not West Avenue, you know where that gold gym is over there? The Valero right there? And it's like way down the street from the medical center, the Valero.
What street's on?
I think it's on the medical center street. No, it's on Babcock. The Valero on Babcock. I don't know that side of the road. I just did some random stuff. I didn't realize that I hurt somebody. I tried to cover it up.
What about your clothes? The clothes you were wearing?
I threw those away too. I threw everything away.
In the same dumpster?
Yeah. I knew that was one thing that I wanted to do. At the time, I think y'all knew what happened. And then if y'all did, the only thing I could do was change my clothes and throw away the gun. I threw it in a random location. Because whenever y'all find out, I knew that I had time for the garbage man to pick it up.
So you throw it in the dumpster, or just like the trash you can't buy at the pump? So
By the dumpster? The green dumpster, or whatever it is, the candy.
and there was it's Valero. You sure it's Valero? What street's on? Babcock? And what's another street near it? Across the street.
I don't even know that area good, man. I don't even know if I'm getting it right. I'm gonna apologize to you if I'm not giving you the right information because I don't remember. I was trying to move fast. But I think Babcock and not the, you know, the new gym, the new gold gym is.
No, not the last side of it. How far is it from the Gold's Gym?
Probably like 5 or 10 minutes away.
But it's on Babcock? Towards the hospital building?
Yeah, all that stuff right there.
Before you get to the hospital, or after?
So what was it?
Is it before you get to the hospitals on Babcock, where you turn off to the hospital?
It's after that. It's after all that stuff.
What's up, if you're going, after you pass the hospitals, if you're going out away from 410, you know, on Babcock, it's on the left side or right side?
So if you come in up Babcock from 14, you're on the left hand side.
Left hand side. Alright. Let's get you out of here because you're cold. And we just have to see, I don't have it off, but we'll get you out of here. Do you remember what kind of gun it was?
Nah, I just know it was a black gun.
Was it,
I don't know the damn gun.
you remember what caliber it was?
No,
Remember how many times you shot?
I shot it twice.
You really don't know what caliber it was?
No, sir, I'm not good with guns. I don't even, man. I had a black gun on the streets on some random stuff.
pay for it?
$300.
I don't know if you have, I don't know where you start, so at least if I can find a blanket, okay? I don't know if you can fit, man. You look like you got pretty big feet. Yeah, that's it. Okay. You might do it, huh? Better than nothing for nothing. What do you think? I'll give you this to wrap around your feet. For just a minute. Till the officer gets ready.
First description. How many years you been on the loose for this?
Yeah, I don't know.
Honestly, like a real number that is appropriate for this, that has been in, you know, have been done in this.
Well, you're asking me, in my experience, what have I seen people that commit crimes like this before? I think it's possible that you may get death penalty. But if not, I think you'll get life in prison.
That's the best thing. The best thing I can get is life in prison.
I mean, I have seen people, you know, do better than that. But, you know, you asked me to be honest with you, and that's what I think.
You think they're gonna get him a death penalty?
I don't know. It's hard to get the death penalty now.
Like I said, son, one day I can just caught up with it, what you got. I'll put this. I know it's hard to look at me on the other way because of the shit, the stuff I do. But, man,
I appreciate your honesty, okay?
can you just tell the people who put in their way, man, that it was a mistake made only ran by emotions. And like I said, I apologize. Okay. I'm regretting it. There's nothing I can do, man.
Let me go take care of some paperwork so we'll get you out of here, okay?
what's up my mom's, because my mom's catching the toilet.
Can you just discuss a little bit, please? And I think we're going, I don't think there's any reason for us to keep it to the shoes. I think we're going to go back to the.
You know where my phone's from?
Yeah. Which one's hurt? This one?
My left one. Can you grab my right one while I wave my left one?
Are you what?
I got a toilet where it's going to show. How are you doing this? I want to do this.
To the back. I'm just going to turn. That's right. Okay. Not standing there kind of double line so that it close up on you. Got it? Okay. Do you have any injuries?
Shoulder hurts right now. It's really burning my left shoulder.
Extremity force? And your left shoulder? You have any injuries that are visible? Because we need to we got to photograph you regardless, so we need to know if you got any visible photographs. Visible injuries, scrapes, bruises, bumps, whatever. Okay. Can you stand up? So you're not, you can't be seriously following you, or it doesn't need you to be in different positions, that's just do as I tell you. And then we're not going to have fun with things, because you okay? Okay. You want one pound or you want one? Yeah, be cool, Lou. Yes. You would swab the inside of your mouth. These swabs here. Right over here. Right over here. Right over here. There you go. Kevin.
Detective Duke, the defendant exits the interview room at 2112. Does he return back to the interview room on the rest of State's Exhibit 329?
No.
So we're going to stop it at 2112 when the defendant exits the room. Detective Duke, the officer that we see in the room at the end where the CSIs come into the room to photograph the defendant, who is that officer? He's adjusting the defendant's handcuffs.
I believe it's Officer Enfinger.
Okay. And are you aware of how the defendant got from the scene of his arrest to police headquarters? Who drove the defendant there?
I'm not 100% certain, but I would assume that Officer Enfinger is one of them since he's adjusting his cuffs. He's considered his prisoner.
Okay. And when the interview begins with the defendant and you ask him whether or not, or he makes the comment, I think, whether or not, I think you asked him, what did they tell you? And do you remember what the defendant said at the scene of the arrest and during transport?
He said they didn't tell him anything.
Okay. So he said they didn't tell him anything other than they asked for his name. Is that a fair statement?
Correct.
Okay. And so the defendant didn't complain about any statements that were made by the officers who transported him from the scene of the arrest to police headquarters prior to giving his statement?
Correct.
Okay. Did the defendant complain about any mistreatment from the officers that transported him from the scene of the arrest to the interview room?
No.
Did the defendant ever make any statements to either you or Deputy Chief McKay about the two individuals that transported, the two police officers that transported him from the scene of his arrest to police headquarters?
No.
Now, the beginning of your conversation with the defendant begins with you said you were trying to make him feel comfortable with you. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay. And so the two of you talked about his relationship with his son's mother.
Correct.
Okay. And do you recall him telling you about that relationship and whether or not it was a good relationship or a bad relationship?
Yes.
Okay. And what were the defendants? How did the defendant describe that relationship that he had with his son's mother?
He said for about the first 6 months, everything went very well. And then after that, it sounded like it was not very good.
And he tells you that in his statement, you said it's not very good, but does he tell you and give you specific examples of why it wasn't very good?
Well, he said that he was the one primarily that was working. He said she would have her parents watch the baby while she went out. He suggested that she may have been using his money to use drugs or to buy drugs. He said she tried to run over him once. Said her mother was always siding with her, and there was conflict between him and her parents. Said there was a trespass warning put out against him.
Okay. And he said that what does that mean, a trespass warning was put out against him?
Well, if the owner of a property or the person in control of the property wishes for someone not to be allowed on their property, they advise them or have the police advise them in the presence of a police officer. So you have a neutral party there. The officer documents it, and he's told he has to leave now or he'll be arrested. And if he returns, I believe they're good for 2 years. If he returns within 2 years, he'll be arrested.
Did he also tell you about whether or not he had been violent towards her?
I think he did mention that he said he'd hit her before.
And did he tell you whether or not there was a protective order against him?
He said there was.
Okay, and what is a protective order?
A protective order is an order by a judge that says an individual cannot get, and they do vary, but they do, usually it's the standard order. They can't be within so many feet of where the protected person lives, where the kids go to school, where the protected person works. No threatening contact, or basically it's to protect and make the protected person feel safe, and officers can take action based on that order. They should arrest the individual when he violates it.
Okay, and he admitted when he was talking to you, his initial complaint seemed to be about not being able to see his son. Is that?
That's what he said.
Okay. And did you have a discussion with him about child support, whether or not he paid child support, or whether or not he was in arrears in child support?
He did, yes.
And what did he tell you?
I recall, I believe he said he was like $8,000 in arrears.
And at one point he says, he talks about his son's mother's parents, so I guess his son's grandparents, being like the father being in the military and the mother working for the police department. Do you know whether her mother even worked for the police department? I'm assuming, he's referring to SAPD. Do you know if she was a dispatcher for SAPD?
I don't believe she was.
Okay. Now, when you're, at some point, the conversation then turns to you asking him about coming to the police department on the morning. Obviously, this is November 21st of 2016, Monday evening, when you're talking to the defendant. But at some point, your conversation with him goes to asking the defendant whether or not he came to police headquarters the previous day, early in the morning, about 7:30, 7:45, on November 20th of 2016. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Okay. And did he admit initially that he was at the police department?
He said he wasn't.
Okay. And did he say that once, or did he say it multiple times?
Multiple times.
Okay. And do you recall him saying, you're trying to make me look like I had something to do with the shooting? Do you recall that?
I do.
Had you mentioned a shooting when you were asking him if he had gone there in the early morning hours before he said a shooting?
No.
Okay. And so what was your response when he said, you're trying to make me look like I had something to do with the shooting?
I asked him what shooting he was. I think I said, what shooting or what shooting are you referring to? Because I hadn't mentioned a shooting, so I was wondering where he got that.
Right. And that came from his mouth first. Is
Correct.
that a fair statement?
Correct.
Right. And so when you said what shooting, what did he say?
He said he didn't know.
He brought it up, but he said he didn't know?
Correct.
And so So after several statements from the defendant saying that he was not there that morning, the day before in the early morning, 7:30, 7:45, did he eventually admit to you that he was there that morning at the police station?
He did.
Okay. And how did that come about? How was it that he eventually told you that he was there?
Well, I let him know that we had video of him being there, but there's no crime for coming to the police station. Wasn't sure why he was denying it, but because it was obvious it was him. So I think once he was convinced that I was telling him the truth, that we could prove he was there, then that's when he admitted to being there.
Did he tell you whether or not that he had been receiving phone calls throughout the day on Sunday, November 20th, 2016, from family members?
He did.
Okay, and what was that about? What was he explaining to you?
What I understood him to say was his family was calling him, saying that the individual that was shown on the news, they thought it looked like him.
So his own family's calling him saying, that looks like you, is what he's telling you?
Yes.
Okay. And then do you ask him, who's calling? Who is it? Who is it that's calling you from your family?
Yes, I did.
And do you recall his response to that?
I think he acted like he didn't know or nobody. I mean, it was a bizarre answer because he'd said it.
Right, and then when you asked who, his response, is that correct? He said nobody.
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
Okay. So is it fair that he didn't want to tell you who was calling him, saying, whether his mother, his sister, his brother, saying, his cousin, that it looked like him?
Yeah, I think that's a truthful, fair statement.
Okay. And when you watch the video, obviously, you're asking the defendant questions, but is he also probing you for answers to what you know about the capital murder case?
Yes, I think he doesn't want to give me truthful answers until he feels certain that I know what the truth is, and there's really no way he can get around telling the truth.
And so at one point then, after he admits to having come to the police department on November 20th, 2016 in the morning to make a report, is that correct? He admits that it's him?
Yes.
That he then says that he had nothing, do you recall him saying he had nothing to do with the other stuff though?
Yes.
Okay, and is that a true statement?
No.
No. And at some point, after he continues to lie to you, does he then apologize to you for lying to you?
Yes. Yeah, I think he apologizes when he knows he's caught.
And so you said he apologized when he knows that he's caught. What does that mean?
Well, Your Honor, we object to lack of personal knowledge causes speculation.
Judge, he was there talking.
I'll sustain. You can rephrase the question.
So comes a time where you tell the defendant, after he admits that he was there that morning and attempting to make a police report, was it your understanding, though, that Kevin Wilkinson attempted to help and get an officer down
Yes.
to help him?
Yes.
And who left instead of waiting to speak to the officer? Who left that morning, walked out of the police department without actually making a report?
Otis McKane.
Okay. The same person that you've identified in court as the defendant?
Yes.
And you, after the defendant admits to being there in the morning, there's a point in the interview where you begin telling him what you know about the capital murder. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And in that portion, you ask the defendant whether or not he's left-handed or right-handed.
Correct.
Okay. And what does the defendant tell you?
He says he's left-handed.
And why is that significant? Why did you ask that question?
Well, in the Coban video, you can tell that the shooter, the person that shot Ben, reaches in the patrol vehicle with their left hand and shoots Ben.
Your Honor, may I correct?
Yes.
I'm going to show you what's been marked into evidence as State's Exhibits 332, 333, and 334. Do you recognize what's contained in these three exhibits?
Yes.
And do State's Exhibits 332, 333, and 334, do these still shots fairly and accurately show what is depicted in the Coban interior video from inside Detective Marconi's vehicle that the state has previously introduced into evidence?
Yes,
And you have watched that video, is that correct, sir?
I have.
Okay. And what I'm referring to, though, is at some point the video was taken because the toggle switch was on. Do you recall the toggle switch being on? So Detective Matt Rosenfield did a 180 or put it through a computer program through Camtasia and corrected the horizontal orientation.
Correct.
Okay, and so these three exhibits, State's Exhibits 332, 333, and 334, do they fairly and accurately show still shots from that interior video that Detective Rosenfield corrected the horizontal orientation on inside Detective Marconi's patrol vehicle?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, this time the state moves to introduce State's Exhibits 332, 333, and 334.
We approach him.
Yes.
All right. Detective D. I'm going to show you what's been introduced into evidence as State's Exhibits 332, and it's still shot from inside Detective Marconi's patrol vehicle? By looking at State's Exhibit 332, can you tell whether or not the shooter, in this case the defendant, is left-handed or right-handed?
Yes.
Okay, and what is he, or what hand is the defendant using as he shoots Detective Marconi in the head?
His left hand.
And looking at State's Exhibit number 332, he has what appears to be a firearm in his hand, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And do you know what type of firearm that is?
It looks, the looks are consistent with a Glock.
And so that would be what, a semi-automatic, is that correct?
Yes.
And is this firearm that we're looking at that the defendant used when he shot Detective
Well, Your Honor, I'm
Marconi?
going to object to her referring to the defendant, whatever person, the defendant, that's a question of fact to the jury. It's an ultimate issue of fact and it's cause of action. And so they can base a promise to the jury. She can refer to the person, shooting Officer Marconi, or whatever, not the defendant, Your Honor, at this time.
You can rephrase your question.
Well, let me rephrase it this way, Detective Duke. Did this defendant, Otis Tyrone McKane, admit to you that he shot Detective Marconi in the head twice? Or that he shot him twice?
Yes.
So this firearm that the defendant admitted to shooting Detective Marconi twice, is this firearm a deadly weapon?
Yes.
So when you, after the defendant tells you that he's left-handed, does he continue to still then deny that he shot Detective Marconi? Or shot, as he refers to as the police officer?
I believe he does for a while.
And on multiple occasions, does he say, that wasn't me?
Yes.
There's times when the defendant in a statement refers to himself as a bowl of acid. He brings up like a lion, a gorilla, and kind of, and then he talks about a bowl of acid. And he refers to himself, when he gives those three examples, as a bowl of acid. What did he mean by that in terms of his explanation to you, in terms of what he said to you?
I'm going to object, Your Honor, lack of personal knowledge, speculation, not relevant.
Sustained. You can rephrase that question.
Well, what did he tell you about being a bowl of acid?
What I understood him to say was the bowl of acid is going to do what the bowl of acid is supposed to do. Almost like it really has no control. It's going to do what it's created to do.
And he was saying that he was that bowl of acid?
That was my understanding, yes.
So the defendant, as you watching this video, continues to deny his involvement and lie to you. Is that a fair statement about shooting the police officer? Until a point where he asks you whether or not he's going to be charged with the offense, charged with it.
Yes.
And so how does that come about that he wants to know, or what brought that about?
Well, he wanted to know why he was there. I think he wanted to know if I knew enough
Well, Your Honor, I'm going to object to speculation. He can testify what the defendant told him, not what he thinks. It's called speculation, lack of personal knowledge, and relevance, Your Honor.
Response?
Well, that's what I'm asking. That's what the detective saying, what the defendant said to him.
No, he started to, I think this is what, and if he's just going to say what the defendant said, I'm good with that.
I'll overrule.
He was fishing to see how much I knew before he admitted to what he did. Before he told the truth, he wanted to know if I knew what the truth was.
And did you know the truth?
Yes.
Okay. And did he, when he asked you whether or not he's going to be charged with the with killing the officer, what was your response?
Well, I guess there was a couple of times that we touched on it. The first time I told him, he wanted to know if he had been charged with murder, and I told him he hasn't been charged or technically charged. He hasn't gone before the magistrate, and the whole legal process of being charged had not taken place. And then it comes up again, and I explained to him that we do have a warrant for his arrest for the capital murder, and I explained to him how we obtained that, how we took the evidence and witness statements, and we compiled it into an affidavit and presented it to a judge, and the judge agreed with us that there was probable cause that Otis McKane killed Ben.
And you offered to show him a copy of the arrest warrant. Is that correct?
I did.
Okay. But he said no, right?
He said I think he said no, I'm good with it.
And at some point during that conversation, once he realizes that he is under arrest for killing Officer Marconi, does he attempt to, or does he ask you questions about whether or not there's any room for negotiation?
Well, he asked me something, and I'm not real sure what he was asking, but I thought maybe he's wanting to know, is there any chance that he's going to be able to get out of this? So I asked him if that's what he meant, and his response was yes.
Whether, when he asked you whether or not there's room to get out, or room to negotiate, or whether or not you can get out of this.
Yeah, and I told him no.
So at that point, after he's informed about the arrest warrant and that there's no room to negotiate on this, or he can't get out of this, does he then begin to make admissions about shooting Officer Benjamin Marconi?
Yes.
He makes some statements about society, paying back society. Can you tell the jury about that?
Well, he mentioned that the only way that he thought he could pay back society, I seem to recall he mentioned a couple of options. I think maybe he suggested he could beat someone up or shoot someone, I believe, or something like that, harming someone else.
And does he mention, when he's referring to shooting the police officer, in this case when I'm saying that, clearly he doesn't know the identity. He doesn't know Benjamin Marconi. Is that the correct statement?
That would, yes.
Okay. And does he tell you that it could have been another police officer?
Yeah, he said it could have been a 21-year-old rookie. He said basically anyone that was a police officer.
And right before he said that, and to quote him, he says, I wanted to fuck somebody's life up. It
Yes.
could have been a 21-year-old rookie. Do you recall him telling me?
Yes.
And a couple times he talks about lashing out. What does that mean, or what was he referring to when he described he wanted to, that he lashed out?
Well, I'm not sure which specific time you're referring to, but I think it was a reference that he's upset, feels like he's been wronged, or hasn't got the help that he feels like he was entitled to.
And kind of along those same lines, the help he was entitled to. He tells you that, specifically, I tried to do everything I could before I shot that police officer. Do you recall him telling you that?
I do.
Okay. And are you aware, or did you research or look at any prior police reports that this defendant made pertaining to visitation or visitation violations with his son?
Yes.
Okay. And does he tell you when, or do you recall, if he told you, or if this is from his conversation with the service agent Kevin Wilkinson, that he hadn't made a report in over 2 years?
Yes, I recall that.
And do you, so that would be 2014, is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay. And do you recall, through your research, how many reports he made in 2014?
How many reports?
Dealing with like child visitation. And I don't know if a report is the right word, or a call, or...
Well, I mean, his name was on multiple reports, but sometimes it's because he called the police, initiated the call. Sometimes it's someone else that he was having trouble with initiated the call. But
that someone else is the child's mother.
Correct.
Is that correct? Okay.
Correct.
So sometimes he's calling, sometimes she's calling. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
And when I look at how many reports are specifically for child custody issues, I only recall finding maybe 2.
And do you recall when those were?
I think they were between 2011 and 2014, but I don't remember the specific dates.
So sometime in that time frame, 2, maybe 3, 4. So a very low number. Would you agree with me?
Yeah, specifically for child custody, you know, I really only remember a couple. Now, some of this took place outside our jurisdiction in Bexar County, but sometimes she would call and say, he's outside, he won't leave, and then when the police would get there, he would say, I'm just trying to pick up my child. But he didn't initiate the call, and it's my understanding he wasn't following the orders how to get visitation. So I wouldn't say that he initiated and asked for help in that matter.
So the statement from the defendant telling you, I tried to do everything I could before I shot that police officer. Did he elaborate on that? He tried to do everything he could?
I mean, I don't think he...
I'm going to object to lack of personal knowledge, speculation. Either the defendant said yes or no, did he elaborate, it said yes or no.
Yes, if you could just answer the question.
So what was the question again?
That the defendant told you, I tried to do everything I could before I shot that police officer. Do you recall him saying that to you?
I do.
Okay. And did he elaborate on what that meant when he said, I tried to do everything I could before I shot that police officer?
I don't think he didn't give me enough information to know exactly what he's talking about, but my understanding was he had tried to resolve it in a court, and he had tried to resolve it with the police assisting him.
And he follows that up in his statement as you continue to talk to him. And he tells you, I wanted to make the police station feel the burn that I felt in my heart.
Yes.
Did he tell you what he meant by that? Or what did you understand him
Well,
to
no.
mean by that?
The lack of personal knowledge causes speculation, and it's not relevant.
Based on the defendant's statements?
No, it doesn't matter. It's still lack of personal knowledge causes speculation, and it's not relevant. He can testify what the defendant said, not what he thinks.
Yeah, of course, Judge. It's,
No, we cannot. I'm sorry.
The question is, did he tell you what he meant by that, or what did you understand? I'll overrule that objection.
He meant that he feels like he had done what was adequate and didn't get the desired result. So he was going to do what he thought needed to be done. And he wanted someone else to feel the pain or the anger that he had felt or that was caused to him.
And that someone else was whom that you learned?
Well, in this case, it was Ben Marconi and his family.
Is there some point shortly thereafter, after he says he wanted the police station to feel the burn that he felt in his heart, does he admit to you that there was no justice in what he did?
He did.
And so you ask him, so do you believe it was wrong?
I asked him that, yes.
And shortly thereafter, in this conversation, as the defendant's telling you like what he did and how he felt, does he make a reference to soothing his soul?
Yes.
Okay. And can you tell us what he said about how his soul was soothed? What soothed his soul?
Well, I don't remember the exact quote, but hurting someone else, I guess making someone else feel what he'd felt.
And there's a point kind of near the end of your conversation where he tells you that he wants to cry and apologize to this person and their family. But what does he follow that up with?
He says he wants to, but he just doesn't feel it. He said he says he has nothing to live for, and he feels nothing. I think he.
I'm going to object, Your Honor, to lack of personal knowledge speculation.
Sustained.
And do you recall him following up when he says that he wants to cry and apologize to this person and their family, but something in my heart just won't let me, man.
Yes.
And then you ask him, do you still feel that way? And he's referring to what he did the day before when he shot Detective Marconi in the head and killed him. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And when you ask him, do you still feel that way, that something in your heart won't let you? And what was his response?
Yes.
And it was more than yes, right? It was absolutely.
It may have been. I don't recall specifically.
And when you're talking to him, based on the defendant's words, okay, the words that he uses to describe the victim in the case, what does he call him? And why I'm asking you this, is it apparent to you, based on the words the defendant's using, that he knew Benjamin Marconi was a police officer?
Yeah, I believe he referred to him as an officer or police officer.
Several times, is that correct?
Yes.
And so you leave the room and you come back several minutes later to ask about the gun.
Yes.
Okay, and why was that important to you to know where the gun was?
Well, I mean, we would like to recover the gun for evidence. Ideally, we'd like to have the gun to match to the spent shell casings and the projectiles recovered from Ben at autopsy, and verify that these were indeed fired from the same gun. And then there's also a safety issue. If it's just tossed somewhere, we don't want a child or someone to get a hold of it, or anyone to get a hold of it and do something with it that, you know, could harm someone or themselves.
And so when you asked him where the gun was or what he did with the gun, what did he tell you?
Well, as I recall, it was kind of like, why should I tell you, or how will that benefit me if I tell you?
And does he...
First he says he doesn't know, and then he goes on to that.
And did he tell you why he got rid of the gun? And the gun, but not. You also asked him about his clothing. Is that correct? The clothing
Yes.
he was wearing, the black. Yes, I know you don't ask specifically, but are you looking for the black hoodie and the Spurs hats and the clothes that he had on that
Yes.
day at
Yes.
the time he shot Detective Marconi?
Yes.
So what does he tell you about what he did with the gun he used and the clothing he was wearing?
He said he threw them in the garbage or a dumpster.
And do you recall specifically when he said, I tried to cover it up?
Yes.
And when you asked him, obviously you're asking him, where that is, what dumpster, is that correct? I mean, y'all are trying to locate the gun and his clothes?
Yes, we're trying to get a good location to go look for the weapon.
And when you're asking him about, the defendant throwing it away, discarding or getting rid of the gun and his clothes, do you recall him saying to you, yeah, I knew that was one thing that y'all wouldn't be able to at the time. I didn't think y'all knew what happened, and then if y'all did, the only thing I could do is change my clothes and throw away the gun. I threw it in a random location because whenever y'all found out, I knew that I had time for the garbage man to pick it up.
Yes.
And what does that indicate to you, sir?
I think that's destruction of evidence.
And so looking at the defendant's actions after killing Detective Benjamin Marconi, looking at various actions of him, starting with the vehicle, what did he do with the vehicle within hours of killing Detective Marconi? And I'm talking about his black Mitsubishi Galant.
Well, he tried to separate himself from the vehicle and the vehicle from his residence by parking it, a block or two away so that he would be separated by distance from it.
And either right afterwards or at some point between the time you either ditched his car, but sometime between the time that he killed Detective Marconi and the time you're talking to him, he made it to a Valero, is what he told you, off of Babcock, and dumps his clothes and the gun in a dumpster?
That's what he said.
Okay. And then, does he go back to his home and spend the night of November 20th of 2016?
I think he goes home, but I don't believe he stays the night there.
Okay. And where does he spend the night?
He and Christian Fields and her child go to a hotel. I think the Econo Lodge.
And I may have asked you this yesterday, but you viewed the video from the Econo Lodge, and the individual in the video that you observed was him.
Yes.
Okay. And who was that individual, the male?
Otis McKane.
Okay, from the night of November 20th, 2016?
Correct.
And then you, I think I asked you yesterday as well about the video from Guillermo Gonzalez's house where the defendant had left his Mitsubishi parked on the 1200 block of Calavera Street.
Yes.
Okay. And then I had asked you whether or not you were able to determine, by looking at the video, if that was the defendant.
Yes.
Okay. And how is it that you can tell that was the defendant?
Well, like we discussed, the totality of everything, the car, the rims, it's in close proximity to his house. He looks physically like the suspect. I'd mentioned that he had the tips of his hair were bleached, even though the video from Public Safety Headquarters doesn't show that because he has a cap on. Later we see him and we know that's how he looks, and the video at the hotel shows him with the bleached ends. In the video where he's walking away from his car going home after he parked it,
The narrative, Your Honor, non-responsive and asking it's already been testified to yesterday.
I think that,
I'll sustain the non-responsive.
so you said the video where he leaves his car
yes,
shows what?
shows him walking, and the part I didn't cover yesterday is you can tell that he has what looks like a lanyard with something on it around his neck. When you look at the video at the hotel, you also see the same, what looks like a lanyard. So when you look at the totality of everything, it's obvious that at Public Safety Headquarters, at the hotel, and after he parks his car and walks home, we're seeing the same individual in all three of those videos.
And then on the morning of Monday, November 21st, 2016, what does the defendant and Christian Fields do that morning?
Well, they go to the courthouse.
This courthouse?
Yes.
And what do they do at the courthouse?
They get married.
And he told you that, right?
Yes.
That they got married that morning?
Yes.
Okay. Now, on your through your investigation, did you also receive fingerprint reports? Like various CSIs collect prints. Do you recall receiving and viewing those reports?
Yes.
Okay. The fingerprints that are lifted from the doors at Public Safety Headquarters, did any of those match the defendant, Otis McKane?
I don't believe they did.
Do you recall that they matched a Hispanic female on one?
There were several that came back. As you can imagine, how many people are coming in and out of Public Safety Headquarters. But I don't remember what race each person was,
But you said
or gender.
Okay, so there are three different individuals that the Layton's prints matched. Is that right? At Public Safety Headquarters.
That sounds right.
Okay, and none of those were Otis, but you said there's people coming and going. Can
Correct.
you tell the jury this is a Sunday morning, and obviously we don't know when those prints were left, or they were left the day before. But let's just, if we just refer to Sunday morning, or individuals buzzed in Sunday morning to inside police headquarters.
Yes,
And you were working on a Sunday, is that right?
yes.
And do witnesses or other individuals, whether they come to file a report or whether they come to give statements to police on cases, do they enter and exit through those same doors?
They do.
And do police officers and employees enter and exit through those same
We're
doors?
going to object to the leading nature of the questions, Your Honor, and the relevance also.
I think it's relevant that you're,
I'll sustain the leading objection.
tell this jury who the jury's seen those doors, but who enters and exits through the police department main headquarter doors on a daily basis?
All employees, all citizens that come there asking for police assistance. And there's no way to know how long those prints have been there because we don't know when that glass would have been cleaned last. So it could have been days or weeks that fingerprint was left there.
Let me interrupt for just a second. Is everybody okay on the jury? All right, let's take a short break.
All rise for the jury.
All right, welcome back, members of the jury. We'll go through till about 12:30-ish. We'll take a lunch break, and then we'll continue on the rest of the day. Remember, if you need a break, let me know. All right, State, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Detective Duke, you told the jury yesterday that you knew Detective Marconi, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, that y'all had worked on the same floor. You were in homicide and he was in the special victims unit?
Yes.
And you saw him, if not daily, regularly at the office?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
I'm going to show you what's been marked and introduced into evidence as State's Exhibit Number 12. Do you recognize this individual?
Yes.
Okay, and who is shown in State's Exhibit Number 12?
Detective Marconi.
Okay, and that's Detective Benjamin Marconi, is that correct? Now I'm going to show you for identification purposes right now only, but the two photos taken of Detective Benjamin Marconi at autopsy, which has his medical examiner number. I'm going to show you State's Exhibit Number 107 and 330. Do you recognize the individual shown in these two photographs?
Yes.
Okay, and who is that individual?
Detective Ben Marconi.
Okay, and that's Detective Benjamin Marconi. Is that, I know you all called him Ben, but his first name is Benjamin. Is that correct? Detective Benjamin Marconi. And Detective Benjamin Marconi, who's shown in his autopsy photos, State's Exhibit 107 and 330, is the same individual that you knew that's shown in State's Exhibit 12. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. As the lead detective after that evening on November 21st, 2016, after you took the defendant's DVD statement, do you then spend the next, say, few weeks getting the items of evidence together, doing evidence submissions, and then eventually file the case in early 2017, January, February 2017, with the Bexar County District Attorney's Office?
That's correct.
Okay. And what was the recommended charge, or the charge that the defendant was being charged with? This defendant Otis McKane.
Capital murder.
Okay. And the capital murder of whom was that?
Detective Benjamin Marconi.
I'll pass you this.
Yes.
Detective Duke, this witness, and we represent Mr. McKane over there. You testified that you have 25 years experience. Is that accurate?
Yeah, a little. Yeah, maybe closer to 26. But
And you went, after 15 years in patrol, you went directly to homicide?
I did.
That's uncommon, right? I'm just saying, you're to be commended for that, because that's uncommon. Generally, right?
I would say generally speaking, it's probably unusual.
Okay, and then when you become a police officer, you receive training on arrest, the law, search and seizure law, etc.?
We do.
Okay. And then when you become a homicide detective, what kind of training do you get?
I don't know what's given now, but we would get, when I was promoted, we got a week of interview class, and we got a week of just investigator school, which covers a lot of stuff, that detectives, anything that a detective may do, whereas the week of the interview class is just about interviewing witnesses or suspects.
And when you say a week, are we talking like 40 hours?
Yes.
Okay. And at least 40 hours of these training, is dedicated to interviewing, interrogation techniques, etc., right?
Yes.
Oh, okay. And of course now by 2016, not only do you have that training, do you have follow-up training also?
Yes.
Okay. But you also have the years of experience in either interrogating or interviewing people, whatever you want to call it, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, getting back a little bit to your investigation, and we'll come back. You said that, a bunch of federal and state agencies assisted in this investigation.
Yes.
Do you remember which ones?
Well, I can't give you an all-inclusive list, but I can tell you the ones I recall.
Okay, that's fine.
I know that the FBI was involved. I know ATF was involved. I know the Texas Rangers were involved. DPS was involved also, other than the Texas Rangers. Those are the ones that come to mind immediately. There may have been more.
Now, the Bear County Sheriff's Office.
Yeah, I think
Marshals.
they had some people involved.
The Marshal's Office. State Marshals.
I think their task force was involved, yes.
Okay. Now, if we go back to, at some point, you went, and I believe you went to Mr. Mike Flores for an ID, for an ID lineup.
Yes.
Okay. But you went with another detective. Do you know, I don't remember right now, who was the other detective? Do you?
Detective Size?
Okay. Now, you also testified yesterday that the photos of the individual that you suspected at the time were released to all police officers because there was a concern for officer safety. Is that accurate?
No, I'm gonna object. I don't think his testimony was, I think that's a misstatement of his testimony, that these photos were released to all police officers. I mean, I think that's it's a global statement, and I think that's a misrepresentation of what he said.
Well, anything I misstate is correct. Okay? I thought you said we wanted all PD to know SP vehicle and SP identification, what he looked like, for officer safety.
Yeah. We did. If you're referring to the photos that were shown in the lineup, I don't have any knowledge of those being released.
No, absolutely.
It's the ones that were recorded at either the shooting event or the event earlier that morning.
Correct.
The car and the individual.
Yeah, and I get it. The idea was if an officer
Sure.
unknowingly pulls this person over, they're not going to be aware of anything that's supposed to be in their life, right?
Right.
Okay. And so when it's released, I mean, do you pick only patrol? Do detectives get it? Do the marshals get it? I mean, you tell me, who got this photo?
Well, we would meet every hour on the hour, and so it was released to the people that were there, and they were to disseminate it to their departments or their people. So that's how it got out there.
Okay. And so, for sure, most of the detectives involved in this investigation would have gotten those photos, right?
We didn't print up a bunch of photos. We showed the video of the morning incident and the afternoon incident, but I mean we didn't pass out photos, but they would have known how to get them.
Okay, I guess I'm just asking. Let's say I'm a detective, and you want to do that. You want me to be safe if I go out on patrol or I stop a car or I'm a patrolman. How would you get that to me?
Well, to be honest, I don't know how they got it out to them. We showed it there, and then people above me decided for officer safety that this needed to go out, and that decision was made.
Okay.
I had no part of that.
Okay, and I'm just asking about police practices, police techniques, not integrity. So when you go do the double-blind ID lineup with Mike Flores, this detective that went with you was involved in the investigation, right?
I would say everybody in homicide was involved
on some level or another.
Okay. And I don't expect you to have personal knowledge of this, but, you know, if you all put it out there, I guess all this information is going around. Every detective in homicide would know about those photos that supposedly you disseminated. I would imagine, right?
I would say so, but I don't believe that Detective Size had any knowledge of who the suspect was in this lineup.
Okay, but you don't know that for a fact, is the point I'm making.
I'm pretty sure because that's what we try to do. We try to have a blind, a person that doesn't know who the suspect is, give it.
Yeah. Well, you know, and I understand most investigations, you know, maybe there's 2 homicide detectives, maybe there's 2 investigators. The point I'm making in this investigation, not only SAPD homicide, SAPD patrol, road, the drugs, narcotics, all this, everyone was involved. That's the only point I'm making. Now, you didn't ask that detective, hey, have you seen those photos? You haven't seen them, right? You didn't ask that detective that, did you?
To be honest, I don't recall if I asked him that specifically.
Okay.
The more likely the question would have been, does he know who the suspect is?
Okay. Now, again, to the police practices, you knew who the suspect was, right?
Yes.
And when the detective went, you and the detective went to Mike Flores, you testified you went to a living room or something like that, correct? When the ID was presented to the lineup.
When we got to the house, he invited us in, and the lineup was shown at the dinner table. When it was time to show it, after we, talked just for a minute, I removed myself from the dining room and went into the living room.
Okay. But on the other hand, just police practices, you didn't have to go necessarily because you knew the ID of the suspect at this time, right?
Well, I mean, it doesn't matter who would have went. It's my case, so I would say probably traditionally that's the way it goes.
Okay, that's fair. Now, do you remember at what point this video or the vehicle photos, whatever, was leaked on social media?
I do not know. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
That's okay.
I mean, it had to be probably Sunday evening or Monday morning. I mean, we're not looking at a very big window.
Sure. But the fact remains that this information was generally only in the hands of law enforcement. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Let me see. Okay. When Otis McKane or any other person, sometimes it's people in custody, sometimes it's people that come voluntarily to give statements, right?
Correct.
And I'm talking about the public safety headquarters. And you talked about the cameras, or the prosecutor asked you, I don't remember. Something along the lines that there's signs that say you're subject to being videotaped. Is that accurate?
Correct.
And in the case of Otis McKane, do you know if for a fact someone said, hey, read that sign before you enter here?
No, I don't know if anyone did. I mean, it's posted where, and not only is it posted, but it's posted in big red letters. I mean,
Correct.
probably 8 inches tall, probably about this long, and it's on the doors that go into homicide.
Yes, sir. Now, but do do you have a practice, let's say when you're walking someone in, to say, hey, please read that before we walk in, or you just walk in?
I've never told that to anyone.
Okay. Now, other than the signs, the interview room, and just generally, not only the one that Mr. McKane was thinking, but any citizen. And I just want to establish that sometimes you take people in there to be interviewed that are in custody, correct?
Correct.
And sometimes it's witnesses.
Correct.
And sometimes it's people that you suspect but are not under arrest.
Correct.
Okay. Now, to all these people, in the instance now with Mr. McKane, the camera, I'll call it the camera lens for lack of a better way of saying it, that is videotaping it, in this instance, Mr. McKane, do you point it out in this instance to Mr. McKane?
No, it's actually hidden.
Okay. And I won't ask you where it is because it doesn't matter, but there's not like a tripod with a camera that someone could say, oh, I'm being videotaped.
No, generally speaking, most people believe there's a camera in there, but they don't see it.
Okay. But there's some people that wouldn't know. Would you agree with that?
Probably so.
Okay. And of course, it's hidden by design. Right?
I agree.
Okay. Because if you wanted to, you could put a tripod in there with a camera.
Yes.
Okay. Now, you also have monitors within the homicide somewhere, I'm not too sure where as you or another detective is conducting an interrogation or interview, other detectives can be watching it, or other police people, whatever the case might be. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. Now, in this instance, when they took in Mr. McKane, you testified that you were talking to Ms. Fields.
Yes.
For a while. I don't know how long. For a while. Is that
Yes.
accurate?
Yes.
Okay. Now, it's also not atypical that when there's an investigation, that simultaneously, for example, one detective is questioning this person, and another detective is questioning this other person. That's not unheard
That's
of.
not unusual, no.
Okay. But in this instance, that did not happen. There's not another detective that went in while you were with Ms. Fields to begin questioning Mr. McKane. That didn't happen in this instance, of course, right?
No.
But it's not for lack of detectives. There were enough detectives there that could have happened.
It could have, but that would have been at my request.
Okay. And it was for your request by design. You would agree with that?
I agree with that.
Okay. Now, we know that police officers, to any citizen that's being questioned, are allowed, under the law, to lie to that individual, to that citizen. Is that an accurate statement?
We're allowed to lie, yes.
Okay. And in this instance, for example, that hour and a half or hour, I firmly believe that the video speaks for itself. But that hour and a half that Mr. McKane was there, and you're over here with Ms. Fields, that was by design also, right?
Well, I would say yes, but probably that probably needs to be clarified.
Okay. Well, I guess the point I'm making is, you testified to it already. You were trying to get information to figure out an angle to come at Mr. McKane. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. And that's not only, in regards, that's not only in regards to Mr. McKane. You would do that with any other citizen you're going to question.
I may.
Okay. And the idea is to get an advantage, right?
I think it's so that we can do the best job possible.
Okay. To figure out a way to get people to talk, citizens to talk.
I think it's the best way to be able to obtain the truth and to know the truth when you hear it.
Okay. But you would agree with me that there's citizens that you question sometimes when you don't know what the truth is. You're actually just, I'm just going to say fishing, I don't mean it in a bad way, but you're trying to get information, right?
There are those times, yes.
Yeah. And so sometimes when you say, well, I'm using this tactics, sometimes it's not really to get the truth, you don't know what the truth is.
Well, I don't. I think those conflict.
Well, I know you're trying to get the truth, but sometimes all I'm saying is sometimes you don't know what the truth is yet.
Sometimes we don't know what the truth is, but the purpose is to find out the truth.
Okay. Now, as in the case of Mr. McKane, when you all bring a citizen in there, you don't know their mental acuity, do you, most of the time?
No, just what we observe, and I guess what seems obvious.
Okay. I mean, because generally the people you're questioning, you don't know them personally, right?
Most of the time we don't.
Okay. And so you also don't know their emotional state at that time, whether they're depressed or happy or excited or, lack of sleep. You don't know their condition at that time.
Most of the time we don't. Sometimes we may have some clues, but most of the time we don't.
Okay. And just generally speaking, you also don't know from your own personal knowledge whether someone's had a beer or whether they smoked a joint or whether they did cocaine or heroin or whatever the case might be, right? Just generally speaking.
We may not know, but I would say sometimes there are clues that lead us to be suspicious of that someone may be under the influence of something.
Sure, just from our personal experience, sometimes we know if someone's been drinking or they look high.
Right.
Now, when you're talking with Ms. Fields, and you said I was trying to find out more about Mr. McKane, you decided, for example, to remove your firearm, correct?
With
Mr. McKane?
yes.
Now, do you sometimes go in with your firearm to question people?
Yeah, I would say I most often do.
Okay. And in this instance, you went as far as to remove your badge.
I know I intended to, but I can't say that I specifically remember doing it. But that would have been my plan.
Okay. And you said you wanted to, for him to identify with you or get it, show him empathy, whatever the case might be, be sympathetic to his position.
Well, I saw it as a potential barrier, and I wanted to remove that.
Okay. Now, just generally with regards to the lies that police are allowed to tell any citizen, like in this instance, he starts talking about the treatment of police officers, whatever, that the arrest, correct?
Correct.
And I'm speaking just generally, okay? Like I said, I'm not going to get into specifics like the problem. But, and you start agreeing with him, just, I'm paraphrasing, that's not right, and it makes it hard for me, then we're going to get to the bottom of this. That was all those subterfuge, correct?
I wanted him to feel like I was not going to be judgmental. I wanted him to feel like I wanted to hear his story. If I call him a liar or tell him that's not true, I don't think the odds of him telling me much more beyond that very good.
Okay. And so when you request Deputy Chief, I'm going to pronounce it McKay, I'm not too sure, and the chief comes in and says, we're going to get to the bottom of this, that was off the show.
Well, I think initially it was kind of triage to see is there anything to it. I'm not aware of any evidence that anyone did anything wrong, but I believe it was initially heard. I think it was served two purposes. I think one is, see if anything wrong did occur according to him, and two, I think it did play a part in making him feel like somebody was interested in hearing what he had to say.
Well, for starters, unless the DA's has to deny it or you, there was never an investigation into any of that, right?
I don't know, because criminal investigations and administrative investigations are not supposed to intertwine. So I don't have knowledge of their investigations.
Okay. Now, when, and now I'm speaking about Mr. McKane, we know in the video, you read him his 3822 warnings, which are commonly referred to as the Miranda warnings, and you did that, right?
I did.
And then you asked them, you understand those rights? And I believe Mr. McKane replied, yes. Yes, sir. Yes, I do. Or something like that, right?
Correct.
Now, the follow-up question, do you waive those rights? You did not ask that question.
I did not.
Okay. And it's not because you forgot to ask it. You don't ask it by design and practice.
Didn't ask it because it's not required or necessary.
And I understand that. I'm just asking, did you forget to ask it, or you do it by design? You don't ask by design. Whether it's required or not is not the question. You do it by design.
I want him to talk and tell me the truth, so I would agree that I think that lowers the odds of me getting the truth if I do.
Sure. And as a matter of fact, and I know you can speak for other detectives, but obviously, I've met you before professionally in other cases. In this instance, you asked him, you understand those rights? And he said, yes, sir. And it's kind of like a police tactic to quickly transition from that. And in this instance, if I remember correctly, you said, that's what they should have done. That's what they should have done. Like the cops out there on the field. Do you remember that?
I do.
And so you shifted from you understand your rights, and like you said, if you ask further, you waive those rights. It lowers maybe the odds that the individual will talk. So not only you do not ask that question, but then you transition quickly to another subject or whatever the case might be, like you did in this instance, right? You transitioned.
Yeah, I'm going to do everything the law says I can to get to the truth.
Sure. Now, and just to make sure, this applies to any citizen that comes in there and gets questioned that's a suspect. Sometimes they're in custody again or not in custody. These tactics that you use with citizens, you use them, period.
I'm going to do whatever it takes to get the truth and to make that person feel comfortable with telling the truth.
Okay.
And that can vary from one person to the other.
Sure.
I mean, I'm not saying there's a tactic that we all follow. I mean, I think this is kind of, I think our goal is to get the truth, and we have to treat some people differently to get that.
Oh, definitely. You mentioned Detective Tim Angel. He has a very different type of interrogation techniques than you do. I mean, every officer is different. But what I'm getting to the point I'm getting to is the lying to people. That's consistent throughout, generally speaking.
I'm going to object back to relevancy, whether it's consistent throughout. I think it's relevant if you're talking about other cases or other detectives. I don't know what he's referring to, but I'm going to object to relevancy if that's what he's referring to.
Overall,
And I'm not saying in all cases detectives, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying it does permeate the interviewing, the interrogations, right?
If you're asking me if it happens, it does.
Yes, sir. Now, in this case, part of the, I guess it's not integrity, it's technique in police practice. Like here, you start agreeing with him about the mother of his child. It's like, man, I can't believe she did that to you, and you know, like at some point, Mr. McKane said, "Would you agree with it? They're bitches." You know, I mean, you don't agree with that women are bitches, right?
No.
Okay. And at some point, you started saying your first ex-wife or your ex-wife cheating that you see your kids. I'm assuming that's a lie. Is it?
Well, I'll answer it this way. I would say that's not a lie.
Okay.
I would say that there's a lot of truth to that. I would say that I experienced a lot of what he's experienced, but I can also say that never once did it make me want to kill anybody.
Okay.
So, to put it into perspective, there's a lot of truth to that, yes.
Okay. And so, I mean, but you're not him. I mean, you have a different level of education and life. You'd agree with me. You're just a different person, right?
I mean, I think that's obvious, yes.
Okay. Now, so there's the subterfuge of the investigation. I would call it false statements about women being bitches, or you should have had her arrested, because he says that she tried to run him over. You said that's your chance. Again, this is all where you're trying to ingratiate yourself with him or something to that effect.
Yeah, I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt and not contesting his statement.
Okay.
I mean, if that's what he tells me, I'm going to believe it for now.
Now, you know, you start telling him, and again, maybe you're giving him the benefit of the doubt that that's not right, that he's not being allowed to see his kid, that's your blood, that's not fair. Those are all, again, statements to either show sympathy or show him empathy, one of those two, or something like that, correct?
I'd agree with that.
Now, there's also times where he's talking and, you know, he even says that he saw certain things on Discovery Channel, and he starts playing, you know, whatever things, and you said, man, that's way over my head. But you know, I can't understand that. I mean, is that sarcasm or something like that?
No, that was true. I had no idea what he was saying.
Okay. Now, then you also, and the law permits it, I get it, you also lied to a citizen, or in this instance to Mr. McKane, about certain pieces of evidence that you claim to have. For example, in this instance, you told him you had video from a VIA bus that showed him doing whatever. That's a false statement. That's a lie.
That was a lie, but I believed that was going to materialize.
Okay. Now, you also told him that his fingerprints were on the patrol car. That was a lie.
Yes.
You told him that there were fingerprints at the entrance to the headquarters. That was a lie. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. you'd agree with me that throughout this interrogation, or interview, okay, you utilize that technique of, false empathy or misleading statements or outward lies to try and get Mr. McKane to speak to you?
I would say I used it with the intent or to encourage him to tell what's true.
Now, at some point, once you told him there was an arrest warrant, and there was a little bit back and forth there, then Mr. McCain's position shifted. Do you agree with that?
I would agree with that.
Now, with regards to the gun, I mean, you all just didn't find it, period, right?
We did not.
And just finally, when you told Mr. McCain that Officer Benjamin McConey had 2 little girls and that you wanted to give them peace, that was not true.
Turns out that's not true, but I believe that to be true at the time.
Nothing further. Thank you, Detective.
Just a couple of follow-up questions. When you read the defendant his Miranda warnings, did you read those warnings to him slowly and clearly?
I believe I did.
And when you asked the defendant if he understood those rights, did he indicate to you that he did? He answered in the affirmative.
He did both times he was asked.
Okay. And he was asked once by you and
Correct.
once by whom?
Deputy Chief McKay.
So he also follows up asking him if he understood those rights.
He did.
Okay. And you testified multiple times, or you stated multiple times during cross-examination that he was asked whether or not the law requires you to ask the defendant whether or not he waives those rights. In this case, does the law require you to ask the defendant, in this case Otis McKane or any defendant, whether or not they knowingly, intelligently, or voluntarily waive those
Well,
rights?
Your Honor, we're going to check in that Article 3822 specifically.
I'm following up on what he said, Your Honor. He brought this up with the detective, and I think if I don't ask this question, it leaves a false impression with the jury. That's not required under the law.
Overruled.
Detective, does the law, we're talking about the law in the state of Texas, obviously. Does the law in the state of Texas require you to ask the defendant, Otis McKane, whether or not he knowingly, intelligently, and voluntarily waives those rights?
It doesn't require that we ask them. I mean, we read them their rights. If they understand them, then they know they don't have to waive them. And if I ask him questions and he answers them, that's obvious he's waived those rights because he just said he understood. He did not have to say anything.
And you told them he had the right to remain silent, is that correct?
That's correct.
That any
Your Honor, that's
statement
been
he made-
answered, Your Honor.
Defense counsel.
He answered. You can ask the next question.
That he didn't have to make any statement oral or written to anyone. Is that
Correct.
right? You told him, any statement you make will be used in evidence against you in a court of law or at your trial. Did you tell the defendant that?
Yes.
that you have the right to have a lawyer present to advise you before, during any questioning by police officers or attorneys representing the state. Did you tell the defendant that?
I did.
Did you tell the defendant you may have your own lawyer present, or if you are unable to employ a lawyer, the court will appoint a lawyer for you free of charge now or any other time?
I did.
Did you tell the defendant if you decide to talk with anyone, you can stop talking to them anytime you want?
Yes.
Did you tell the defendant the above rights are continuing rights which can be urged by you at any stage of the proceedings?
Yes.
And then after you read those to him, you asked if he understood those rights. Is
Yes.
that, okay. And the defendant spoke to you.
Correct.
And he spoke to you for almost 2 hours, and say, and I wasn't timing it, but somewhere around there, for a significant period of time.
Yes.
And during the time he spoke to you, did he ever ask for an attorney?
No.
Did he ever invoke his right to remain silent?
No.
And defense counsel asked you questions about that you don't know someone's educational background. Do you remember that?
I do.
Okay. Initially, I mean, generally you're not interviewing someone you know. But in this case, the defendant told you, correct, what his education
He
was?
told me that he'd attended two colleges.
Had gone to Fox Tech High School and then attended 2 colleges.
Correct.
And the entire time you were talking to the defendant, there was a line of questions about, you don't know if he had a beer, if he smoked a joint or something like that. Did the defendant appear to have did his mental faculties appear to be intact?
Yeah, there were no clues that we would normally look for that suggest he was under the influence of anything.
And have you encountered in your 25, 26 years as a police officer, have you interviewed individuals that are under the influence, or whether it be of alcohol, drugs, or any other substance?
Yes.
Okay. And in this case, based on your years of being a police officer, did the defendant appear to be under the influence of any type of narcotics, alcohol, prescription drugs, marijuana, anything?
No.
And did he seem to understand your questions?
Yes.
And my question was, you said he seemed to understand your questions, and what is that based on?
Well, his ability to respond, to give an answer that's relevant to the question that's asked.
So obviously we saw this on State's Exhibit 329, you asked a question, and his response was to the question you asked. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay. And do you know if any drugs or alcohol were found on the defendant when he was arrested?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. And if any drugs or alcohol were found in his possession when that white Buick was searched, or in that white Buick?
Not to my knowledge.
All right. And was there any drugs or alcohol found at the Econo Lodge when it was searched?
I don't believe so.
And how about the defendant's apartment at 1236 Lombrano? Were there any drugs or alcohol found there? Or marijuana?
Not that I'm aware of.
And we saw the question was asked of you by defense that was it by design to leave the defendant in this interview room for an hour and 15 minutes alone while you spoke to Christian Fields, and you said you wanted to clarify that. Do you recall that line of questioning in your statement?
Yes.
Okay. And so what were you said by design. He asked you if that was by design, and you wanted to clarify it. What did you want to tell us?
Well, I just want the jury to know that he's not just placed there to percolate or simmer or to prime him, and that has anything to do with whether or not he's more likely to confess. By design, he's placed there, one, in the view of the camera so everybody can see that he's treated fairly, and two, while we can show he's being treated fairly, I can interview other people and get more information so that I can go and intelligently interview him. He could tell me anything, and if I don't have some knowledge of what I'm talking about, I won't know if he's being honest or not. So I need to gather some facts. And one of the things I needed to do is I needed to talk to the person that had just spent the last day or two with him. So that was the design, but it has nothing to do with setting him over there and just making him wait. There was actually a plan to do something else so that I can interview him better.
And while you're talking to Christian Fields, you said, in order to obtain information, so you could then use that information when you speak to the defendant. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes.
Okay. That the defendant is placed in the interview room where he's being videotaped, so that he's seen. We can see how he's being treated or what's happening. Is that a fair statement?
That's just been asked and answered, number one, and two, it's leading.
Sustained.
So why is he placed in the interview room as opposed to just, just walking around homicide?
Or been asked and answered, you said it already. This is repetitive, it's cumulative, and it's leading.
Overruled.
Well, he's under arrest for capital murder, so it's not safe for him to be wandering around. If we place him in the room, we're able to have him in a confined area where we can easily keep an eye on him. And if he decides to make accusations that, the policeman threatened me or beat me up, and that's the only reason I confessed, we can show that nothing like that ever happened. I mean, it's for transparency,
And when you walked into the room, did you have to wake the defendant up in order to speak to him?
I honestly don't remember. I know he had been napping off and on, but I can't remember if he was actually asleep when I went in there.
And when once you came in and spoke to him, did he fall asleep any time during your interview when you're speaking to him?
No.
Or nod off or take a nap or anything like that?
No.
Did he seem to be alert to you?
Yeah.
And just finally, you testified about you said to defense, I'm going to do everything I can under the law to get the truth. Is that your, your philosophy, so to speak, when you take a confession?
Well,
is that your job?
The short answer is yes, and specifically in this case, anybody that saw the video of what happened to Ben when he was shot in the patrol car.
I'm going to object to non-responsive and narrative.
Sustained.
So is that your job, though? In order to do what you can, though, under the laws of the state of Texas, in order to find out the truth from the person who committed, in this case, the defendant, committed the capital murder of Detective Benjamin Marconi?
It's my job, and it's owed to the family of the victim. And if I don't do everything that the law says I can do, I feel like I've failed those people, the loved ones of the victims, and the victim. When you compare,
I'm going to object, Your Honor. Non-responsive, narrative. Okay.
Sustained.
Okay, I'll pass the witness.
Thank you, Detective. No further questions.
All right, Detective Rich. right, members of the jury, we're going to go ahead and take a lunch break. Come back no later than 2 o'clock, and we'll proceed with the trial.
All rise for the jury.